So today we are going to discuss filters. See, this filters concepts, why they added in the servlets concept. Every time we used to submit our form data, we used to submit our form data always to a servlet. So in this servlet we can read data. Once after reading data, we can pass the data to model part. Model part will do database operations. Once if you get data from user, you can do your required model operations. Servlet job is what? It need to read data, it need to pass it to model layer. Model layer response it need to take, that response it need to send to the user. So this kind of servlets throughout application, if you see, if it is the application like ICICI banking application or your IRCTC application, whatever it is. While submitting this form data every time to servlet, sometimes data may send a valid data or invalid data also from here. So for doing validations, what we used to do here, by using JavaScript we can apply validations. In case if the JavaScript execution fails, in case in your local machine, if you disable on your local machine, if you disable JavaScript, then this JavaScript validations will not execute. So that invalid data will go to servlet. From here, using that invalid data only it will execute model operations. So before going to servlet, one more time if you want to apply any filter kind of operations, like if you want to check whether this data is valid data or invalid data, you need to apply validations, right? At least not null validations we need to check, whether this field is empty or not you need to check. So throughout how many servlets, for how many servlets you need to do these operations? For entire application you may have number of servlets. Okay, you may have number of forms. For number of forms you may have number of servlet classes here. So each form we used to forward to one servlet class. So instead of submitting a invalid data to servlet, if you have any capabilities for doing validations before sending to servlet itself, that validations we can do here, right? So using filters, what we can do before submitting data to our servlet, if you use a filter here, using a filter you can do filter operations. Means you can do any filter operations here. Filtering means data filtering you can do. Data filtering in the sense, if you try to send invalid data from here, you can validate the data here. If the data is invalid data, you can forward error messages. If data is valid data, you can go through servlet classes. So for every input form request, you can configure a servlet. In that servlet, you can do filter operations. In how many ways we can do that operations? Filter will execute 2 times. When I submit data through a filter to servlet, it will execute 1 time. Let's say for suppose from here if I submit, it will execute filter, along with your filter it will execute servlet. Once after execution of your servlet output, again it will forward through the same filter. So while before sending to servlet, if you want to execute any operations, you can execute here. After completion of your servlet output, if you want to append any extra output also, you can append it from here. Getting? So before submitting to servlet, you can do validations here. Validation kind of stuff if you can execute from here. While sending response from servlet to user, you can do any output rendering operations. For doing output rendering operations, while sending data to servlet, for doing validations, these filters are very helpful to us. Getting here? So before sending my form data to servlet, I want to do validations. While sending output from my servlet, I want to do some kind of advertisements I want to add. To my dynamic input, I want to add some advertisements. So that advertisements kind of text you can add from here. Means output. For your output, you can add something else. And while sending data to servlet, you can add validations kind of stuff here. How you can execute them? Using filters, you can execute. Okay. If you try to implement a filter will come up with 3 methods. Filter will come up with 3 methods. Those 3 methods are what? One is init method. It will come up with one init method. It will come up with one destroy method. Along with these 2 filters, 2 methods, here it will come up with one more method, do filter. Like your doGet doPost, one method you should implement public void doFilter with input parameters simple request, simple response, and one filter chain. With these three inputs, your container will pass one request object, one response object, and one filter chain object. So inside this method, you need to execute these two operations. One is pre-operation, right? Before executing servlet, you are executing it here. So then you can consider this operation as a pre-execution. Okay, before servlet you are executing here. So this one is pre-operation. Once after execution of your servlet, you need to do output page rendering operations. Just I want to change my background color. From here I am sending a plain output. For that plain output I am adding, I want to add one background color, or I want to do some advertisements kind of things here. So before sending to servlet, if you want to execute anything, you can write here. After execution of your servlet, if you want to execute anything here, you need to do what? To send your data to servlet, you need to call filter chain dot do filter, and here you need to pass request and response. Once if you call this do filter, then your execution will go to servlet. Your execution will go to servlet. Once after servlet execution, again the response it will give to the filter. So before do filter method, if you write any operations, that operations will execute before your servlet. After do filter call, filter chain dot do filter call. After do filter call, if you write anything here, it will execute after your servlet. Okay, so filter will execute two times. One is before servlet execution, after servlet execution. But servlet will execute only in one way direction. Okay, just they will take request and directly they will send response. From one servlet to another servlet, if you try to forward a request, can we expect response again? In case of forward, we can't write. In case of forward from one servlet to another servlet, if you shift, that servlet directly it can send output. But in case of include, it will include the previous output. But here what we are trying to doing, before calling do filter, if you write any code here, that code will execute before your servlet code execution. Then when you call do filter, it will execute your servlet methods. After execution of your servlet doGet method or doPost method here, after execution of your doGet or doPost code here, after execution of your doGet or doPost method execution, servlet exception and IO exception. After execution of this do filter, let's say here if you have some statements, after execution of all these statements, the response again it will come back through the filter itself. So filters will execute in two ways. So if you want to do any filtering kind of operations, you can execute that filter operations here. Okay, filtering operations means checking security or doing validation kind of things. Okay, before submitting to my servlet, is that user is valid user or not, I want to check. So you can check it here. In case if he is valid, then you can forward. If he is invalid, then from here you can send error output. In case if you call filter chain dot do filter method, immediately it will pass this request and response from your filter to servlet. Okay, so before calling do filter method, if you have any execution here, that execution you can expect before your servlet execution. After do filter method, if you have anything, you can expect that output after your servlet execution. Okay, filters will execute in two ways: before servlets, after servlets. You can see example.